Quilt Company. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. I'm so glad that you're here. So I'm a quilter and I love quilting, and then I share the projects that I'm working on and how I made them on this channel. This video in particular is actually part of a series that I'm doing this summer, the 2025 Summer Quilt Along. It is a very scrap-friendly quilt along that's free to participate, and I make all of the resources available on our website. So if you're interested in a scrap-friendly quilt along, you might want to check this one out. So this is for block 2 of the sew along. If you missed the first video, you might want to go check that out because I show how to sew block 1. And I also kind of go through the series in a little more detail and just give you an overview of what to expect for the sew along. And in case you missed block 1, this is what it was. This is an 8-week long sew along, so it's not too long, but there are some quilt blocks that you'll need to make more than once, so just keep that in mind when you're participating. And I just want to share again how to get to the patterns for this quilt along. Everything is available on our website at delafieldquiltco.com, and at the top you'll see quilt alongs. If you click on that, a little menu drops down. You want to choose the 2025 quilt along. And on that page you'll see all of the information for the quilt along up through this week. I do release the patterns when I release the videos. The videos do come out on Sundays at 9 a.m. Central Time. And on this webpage you'll find information about the project, the schedule, fabric requirements, a coloring sheet that you could download to help with your color placement. And you'll also find each of the block instructions for the quilt. Alright, let's get started with block 2. So block 2 is a little bit smaller than block 1. Block 1, if you recall, was 27 inches finished. This one's only going to be 9 inches finished, so it's much smaller blocks. Actually, the blocks moving forward at this point are just 9 inches finished, 9.5 inches unfinished. So block number 2 is essentially a 9-patch block, and this one's also known as the Ohio Star. We're going to make 4 hourglass blocks, and then we'll put it together to get this star look. So I'm going to show a pretty simple way to make the hourglass block. There are faster ways, but I wanted it to be very scrappy, so that's why I'm doing the individual pieces to get the hourglasses. Alright, let me show you how I made this. Okay, so block 2 is actually a pretty easy block to make, and I'm going to walk you through how to make one, but you are going to actually need 4 of these blocks for your quilt project. Here's where those 4 blocks are going to be positioned on your quilt project. So for block 2, I'm going to use some violet scraps, and here are the pieces that I'm going to need to cut for just one of the blocks. Again, remember that you need 4 blocks total, so you're going to take this times 4 so that you can have the pieces for all 4 blocks. Okay, this block is pretty simple to make. I'm just going to go ahead and cut all of my pieces. I'm going to cut them really fast. Normally I don't cut fabric this fast, but for the sake of YouTube videos, I can make it go as fast as I want. Alright, I have all of my pieces cut. Now I need to take my 4.5 inch squares. I'm going to take both of the natural, the background color, and the violet ones, and I'm going to subcut them into 4 equal triangles. Now when I'm subcutting these, I'm just going to layer a couple of the blocks together and cut multiple at once. I do want to make sure that the edges are lined up carefully. And to cut these, I want to be very careful, take my time, and I want to use that 45-degree angle mark of my ruler and make sure I'm going from point to point on the squares. So on this one I'm starting on the left corner and lining up my ruler carefully down to the bottom corner, making sure I've got that 45-degree mark on the edge. Just make sure it's nice and square. And then I'm just going to go ahead and cut it. I'm going to carefully lift up my ruler, and then I'm going to turn my piece. If you've got one of those rotating mats, that's really good for this project. And then I'm going to cut from the other top corner to the bottom corner to get the 4 triangles that I need. And then I'm just going to repeat that on the other 4.5 inch squares. Okay, now that I've got those all cut, I'm going to go ahead and lay out my hourglasses. I think it's important to lay them out first just to make sure that you are sewing the right edges together. And we have 2 of the white, or the natural color in this case, and 2 of the violets. And then I'm just going to carefully line up the edges. I'm going to put a pin here in place just to keep this together. And I'm going to repeat that for the other triangles. And then I'm going to sew a scant 1/4 inch on these pieces. And I want to make sure it is a scant 1/4 inch. On my machine, I like to use my 1/4 inch foot, but then I move the needle one spot over just to make it slightly smaller than a 1/4 inch. And then I'm just going to sew along the edges. If you're not using a scant 1/4 inch, you might find that your pieces are a little off when you try to put the entire block together. And then once I'm done sewing these, I'm going to press towards the darker fabric of the hourglass. Okay, now that I've got these two pressed, I'm going to piece them together to get an hourglass. When I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I've really lined up those seams well on both of the pieces. So I just lift up a little bit, make sure the seams are aligned, make sure my edges are nicely aligned as well. And I'm going to put a pin right on those seams just to make sure it keeps them together. And then I'm going to do a scant 1/4 inch again. And once I have my piece sewn, I'm going to go ahead and press this hourglass open. And now I want to trim it. I'm going to trim it down to 3.5 inches square. I'm using the 45-degree mark on my ruler. I'm going to line it right on that seam there, that diagonal seam. And I'm going to start a little bit bigger than 3.5 so I can get a nice clean cut on the first two sides. And then I'm going to turn my piece and I'm going to line it up again on that 45-degree mark on the seam, and then make sure I'm lined up on the 3.5 inch marks on my ruler. And then I'm going to cut the remaining two sides and I'll have a nice 3.5 inch unfinished hourglass block. So I've already got all of my hourglass sewn for this one quilt block. You need a total of 4. And I'm just going to lay it out now. When I'm laying these out, I want to make sure the white is all pointing towards the center block. And then I'm just going to grab my 3.5 inch blocks. I've got my center violet one here, and then my 4 natural colored ones for the corners. And then I just need to sew it together. And here is the finished block. Now this should be unfinished. And by unfinished I mean it's not sewn yet in the entire quilt. So your block it should be a 1/2 inch bigger than what your finished block is. But the unfinished should be 9.5 inches square. Alright, that's how to make block 2 of the 2025 Summer Sew Along. I hope that you liked this video. If you're sewing along, I would absolutely love to see pictures of your projects. I put a few tags in the project overview that's on our website, hashtags that if you do Instagram or Facebook, that if you add them to your pictures, then I'll be able to see them that way. Or if you want to email me at Kathy@DelafieldQuiltCo.com, I would just love to see how your projects are turning out. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you next week for block 3.